Welcome to Season 5 of eCommerce Fastlane. This podcast helps resilient entrepreneurs, marketers, and founders to accelerate growth and thrive with Shopify. And now on to episode 243.
You're listening to eCommerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder, and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Before today's episode, I have a question for you. How many marketing experiments have you done in the last 4 weeks? How about in the last year? Now look, if you're doing 7 or 8 figures in revenue on your website or more, and you're not doing conversion optimization, you're leaving a ton of cash on the table. You won't scale to the next level, and you're going to get your lunch eaten by the competition over the next 12 months. Now, our sponsor, Conversion Fanatics, runs thousands of experiments each year for clients like Clorox, Burt's Bees, NBC Sports. We have a whole list here. Golf Channel, HarperCollins, ClickFunnels. I can rattle off a ton. There's an incredible amount of brands, including Shopify brands, that they run these experiments on. And what Conversion Fanatics does is that optimizes your Shopify store so you can get a lot more customers, scale up your traffic much faster, and see a lot more profit fall into your bottom line. And they make it easy, and they handle everything. So go to conversionfanatics.com for a free site proposal today and tell them eCommerce Fastlane sent you, because traffic without maximizing conversions, in my opinion, is sad. Well, hey there, it's Steve Hutt, and welcome back to Season 5 of eCommerce Fastlane. Whether this is your first time listening or you're a weekly subscriber, I seriously appreciate your taking time today and listening to the show. I know there's plenty of podcast choices kind of out there in e-commerce and direct-to-consumer marketing, and the fact that you're here today really does mean the world to me, and I definitely to my featured guests today. And if this is your first time listening, we're an e-commerce show. We have honest and transparent conversations about building and thriving with your store powered by Shopify or Shopify Plus. If you're an ambitious lifelong learner, which you likely are since you're here today, you're definitely in the right place. Now, new episodes, like I said, are available twice weekly. They're available from all your favorite podcast apps like Apple and Spotify. I highly recommend that you click through to the show notes for today's episode. It's at ecommercefastlane.com, and there you'll have the show transcript, the links, and all the resources and things that we mentioned today. Now, on my episode for today, I'm excited to actually have 2 guests. Very rare, but it's actually awesome. It's Paul Rogers and Josh Duggan, who are from a company called Vervaunt. They're an agency partner, and Paul is the managing director of Vervaunt, and he's joined by his business partner, Josh. Just as a side note, Vervaunt is an award-winning paid media agency and an e-commerce consultancy, and they work with a number of incredible Shopify brands to really help them grow and scale. So hello, Paul and Josh. Welcome to eCommerce Fastlane.
Hi. Yeah, nice to be on. Yeah, we're really excited to join you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Steve.
My pleasure. And I know our time zones are significantly different. You being in the UK at the moment, me being in Vancouver, and I know it's evening time for you and mid-morning for me, but where there's talent, I want to make sure that we all come together and get a great recording. And I've looked over some of the Q&A that I've kind of prepared for today, and I'm hoping to unpack a lot of interesting questions that brands are having around paid media. I think is one of the big topics right now, just the ROAS being so high. But let's talk a little bit on the high level first. Let's educate those listeners, like what does Vervaunt do, and why do a lot of Shopify brands choose your agency to help them grow and scale?
Yeah, so essentially Vervaunt is a 4-year-old kind of e-commerce consultancy and performance marketing agency. As you said, Josh set it up. We have 2 sides to the business. So the e-commerce consultancy side and the performance marketing. So they operate pretty separately, but they do actually cross over a lot more than they used to. And then in terms of kind of offerings, so the first one I've already kind of talked about, performance marketing, primarily paid search and paid social. We have a big focus on creative and testing and on-site experience. So, there's a lot of agencies that have that as well, but we'll come on to why we're slightly different. And then my side, which is the e-commerce consultancy side, is focused on 3 key areas. So we do a lot of replatforming projects. So not just with Shopify, but we'll usually be brought in quite early. We'll do the kind of initial BA process. We'll help to build the business case. We'll build out the tech stack, all of the requirements. We'll kind of work with different stakeholders on that process. We'll select the SI, and then we'll deliver the project and kind of govern the project. So that's kind of one area, which is kind of where we started, but we'll come on to that a bit later. We then do a lot of road mapping. And as part of that, we kind of prioritize and accelerate the delivery of items on the roadmap. So we don't actually do any development work, but we do kind of all of the BA work associated with that. We scope everything out. We do quite often a lot of the solution architecting around that. And then we'll work with one of the Shopify partners or different platform agency to deliver. And then we do a lot of strategy work as well. So slightly higher level, we'll work with more senior stakeholders, and we'll kind of support in prioritizing investments and budgeting and building teams, all of that kind of stuff.
Just like from a creds perspective, so we're the highest level of Google partner and the highest level of Facebook partner. I guess just in terms of like our focus, we only work with e-commerce brands, and we typically work with both a mixture of established brands, and so like Joseph, Molton Brown, Stussy, many others, but we also work with a number of kind of like fast growing D2C e-commerce only clients. So yeah, hopefully we can kind of like give some good context and value in the podcast.
Beautiful. Well, thank you both for sharing kind of what you do, because I think when you say the word, marketing agency, and it turns out that you're much more depth than just that. And we talk about just, the acquisition side, but then the business kind of operations side of kind of understanding the business and really getting involved in unpacking how the business can actually operate and how it can improve itself. I think the more brands you work with, you're able to leverage a lot of that knowledge and that power and pass it down to the next brands that you start to work with. One thing I want to mention before we kind of go on to my next question, I want to give you a big shout out and congrats on winning the kind of e-commerce agency of the year award for 2021. What does that mean to you and the team to kind of get this kind of public recognition?
Yeah, it's great, to be honest. It's just really nice to win those kind of awards. Historically, to be perfectly honest, I didn't love awards, and I didn't really think too much of them. Yeah, it's just good recognition, isn't it, really? And yeah, both sides of the business contributed. I think a lot of it was around, how we service clients, something else. So yeah, we love it.
Mm-hmm. So what do you specifically believe are some of the reasons why you were nominated and then subsequently won? Because I'm sure there's some variables and a bunch of people in a pool, but then, the cream kind of rises to the top. And so what do you think kind of, the judges in the end have chosen Vervaunt as the winner?
I mean, the team's a big one. We've got a really strong team, and I think we've grown quite quickly over the last 18 months, but I think one of the things we've done is kind of invest in good people and also kind of nurtured good talent. So I think that's a big part of it. I think we're quite unique as well. So you talked about it a second ago, but the consultancy side is kind of pure consultancy, which is still quite rare these days. And then, yeah, the paid side as well. I think we're quite unique in kind of how we're working with different clients.
I guess globally, advertisers are moving towards automation, and we're relying more on the Facebook and Google platforms and kind of like any other platform out there. The big focus for us has been adding much more value beyond just kind of like day-to-day optimization. So all of our team are able to kind of like go into a CRM system. They can kind of like look at customer data, they can look at trends, and they can adapt marketing strategy. Off the back of it, we all look into kind of like lifetime value. A big focus of the agency is how we can scale brands internationally. So we have a big focus within the team in terms of, kind of like what payment gateways are needed per market and just being much more technical. So as an agency, we're, very focused on aspects of e-commerce beyond just paid media. I think we had a couple of specific award entries with Pangaya and a couple of other clients that grew quite quickly. Yeah, I think just for us, we've just got a big focus beyond just paid, which is quite useful.
That's lovely. So let's talk a little bit about the origin story. I'm always fascinated why people build what they build or how they come together. In some cases, it's a SaaS product. Sometimes in your particular case, it's more of a consultancy / kind of like, pure play kind of marketing, kind of direct to consumer opportunities. And so how did all the pieces come together for the founding team, both you and Josh? Where did the desire, where did the expertise come from to want to build this agency?
Yeah, so we kind of did it accidentally. So I was operating as an independent consultant to start off with, and I was working on a lot of replatforming projects, kind of on retainer with some e-commerce brands that were starting to take direct consumer seriously. And I was more focused on the kind of technology and roadmap side. And then Josh was my best friend. So we met in school basically like years and years ago. He was working for a large media agency on big clients, and I guess maybe he was questioning the service that was being delivered, everything else. And then Josh started doing some freelance for me on the side, helping a couple of brands like O'Neill's, Beyond Retro to start off with. I think they were the first two, kind of prove the concept of paid, and some other brands actually as well that were going direct. And we did a lot of work around kind of justifying bidding on brand when this is a long time ago. So we were kind of working together, and then one day, we were getting so much demand and the work was going really well. So we were like, actually, there's an opportunity here. And it wasn't that we went to market as an agency. Initially, the plan was we'd be a consultancy and we'd go into businesses together and we'd be really ingrained. We'd go and sit down with the marketing team, the e-com team, the IT team, the finance team, etc. And we would essentially like build the programs and then start to push paid and grow e-com and kind of work with the e-com team as well on my side. And then over time, we just became a little bit more like a traditional agency, I guess. So the paid side's much bigger. So that's become a little bit more traditional agency. And then on my side, I started working with Shopify about 5 years ago, did a project with Bulletproof, which was a really good project for me. And then kind of carried on that side and then gradually built out a team that's a bit more Shopify focused. So we hired a full stack developer who operates as a solution architect. We've got a product owner who's got a bit of Shopify experience, and then we've built out from there, and now we have a team of 6. And then the paid side has kind of developed from there. We do work really closely together. We do a lot of support work for the paid. So our average paid clients, we will have inputs into their UX and their roadmap, and we do a lot around international. The ecom team will do a lot around kind of international payments or tax and duties or whatever else it is. So we've kind of developed this combined offering, I guess, from there, really.
It's lovely. I know we mentioned Bulletproof. That's one of the accounts that I manage. So there's another Josh over there who's my main point of contact, but I know all the team over there, and I just love, and I'm not sure if you were part of it, but I just love the fact that they're running WordPress on their front end as their content strategy, but then they're running a subdomain and it's an identical looking website. And I just love how they're able to have their search functionality reveal from 2 CMSs. So we have the WordPress CMS, and then you have the Shopify CMS, and they're able to reveal both content and product recommendations in real time, no matter what CMS the site visitor lands on. And I'm sure there's lots of other UX improvements and things that you guys and they've been done over the years. But yeah, love Bulletproof.
Yeah, they were a great client actually. And yeah, I was a part of that initially. So yeah, I migrated them a long time ago and they had a really solid in-house team. And yeah, I did some of the initial kind of due diligence on Shopify. They were reviewing Shopify and Salesforce. And then, yeah, they launched that in about 10 weeks. And that was a really good project. And then I carried on working with a few head of e-coms over the years, but we don't do too much with them now. But yeah, they're a great business. And I know Josh quite well, and he's great as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the paid advertising, because I know it's a little bit of a sore spot for a lot of brands. I mean, now with iOS is 14.5 update and people have to manually opt in to be tracked. And so the default is to don't track. And so knowing that, it's causing a lot of challenges. And I have a lot of brands messaging me saying, how do we deal with ROAS now? Like, is everything just a blended ROAS? Like I spent this, I got this, and is there no granularity? So there's lots of like kind of what if scenarios in this cookieless future and like all these crazy things that are going on in the world right now. GDPR, kind of where you're, CCPA, there's lots of stuff going on. So I know this is kind of a loaded question, but what are you seeing with the brands that you're currently working with right now around maybe allocating their spend, or are there any specific trends that you want to kind of share with our listeners today?
Yeah, spot on. So I think that's a great question. And I guess just because I could obviously talk about this for hours, I try and focus on a few key areas. Yeah, a big one's obviously kind of like the privacy piece. So the iOS changes being a pretty big fundamental one. Obviously Safari going cookieless and Chrome planning to kind of like follow suit. So a big focus for all advertisers, which I'm sure kind of like a lot of listeners will be aware of, is essentially the importance of not necessarily just owned first-party data, but really well-managed data. So, really understanding your consumer behavior, kind of like what are the triggers for people to purchase, at what stage does kind of like the second purchase come into play, and when should you be retargeting consumers. So a big focus for brands should just be owning first party data. So rather than being reliant on Facebook and Google kind of like targeting and data sets, you really want to own as much data as possible. And that way you'll always be able to retarget. So you're not relying on the cookie, or you're not relying on any other form of remarketing. You're simply fully using your own first party data. So whether that's an email address or kind of like a phone number or any form of opt-in data, you've got the ability to retarget those. Yeah, a big focus obviously would be kind of like uploading CRM lists into Facebook and Google and just making sure that's possible. Just on the kind of like privacy piece as well. So Google have actually reflected Facebook's approach to measurement. So Facebook obviously introduced their conversions API and server-side tracking about 12 months ago now. So in response to kind of like the initial iOS changes, and Google have essentially followed suit. So a fundamental focus for all advertisers needs to be to get that server-side tracking set up. And essentially the most basic way to explain that would be, rather than monitoring the consumer with a cookie and then kind of like triggering that on the purchase confirmation page, what it does is it sends back the user data in a hashed way, and then it matches that to the ads what was served. So it just means that you don't need to be relying on any kind of cookies or anything which would no longer be tracked. You simply use your first party data and pass that back to the platform. So yeah, definitely making sure server-side tracking setup is fundamental. I think what's quite exciting, so a big change to Facebook has been moving away from like highly targeted campaigns. So historically, you would have multiple campaigns targeting different audiences, serving different creative. And I think the biggest change here is that the Facebook algorithm has just got so strong and is so effective that you're better off actually targeting a broad audience and allowing Facebook to identify the people most likely to buy. And what that's caused is like a big shift in conversations moving away from audiences. So we're not talking about audience 1 versus audience 2. We're now talking about creative, and it's every brand's purpose should really be to understand what creative resonates with a broad audience. And it kind of follows like how marketing worked 10 years ago, you know, where you would run on TV, you would target broad audiences, you would A/B test creative. And I think that's a change which is kind of like slowly coming into play, but definitely something to be considering. And equally, something which I don't think is discussed enough within the paid landscape, but it's the customer experience. So making sure you're fundamentally testing landing pages, at least across different stages of the funnel. So if you've got a completely cold prospect, should they be taken through the brand story and kind of like introduction to the brand's purpose and ethos? Or should it be simply, you know, the product collection and really being focused there? And then I guess just to touch on like the iOS piece. So it's quite an interesting one. So Facebook came out and said that they've seen a 15% drop in conversion rates following the iOS changes. So Facebook actually kind of like remodeled how they even track conversions back in September. So a lot of brands should have started to see an improvement in conversion rates from September onwards. But the biggest issue we're seeing is the CPMs. So there were 30% more advertisers in 2021 versus 2020. So Facebook's just becoming much more competitive. And I think with COVID and stores being closed and lockdown, many brands moved to advertising online. And for us as an agency, our biggest challenge is kind of tackling those higher CPMs. So for a lot of brands, we're paying, 50% more to serve an ad, whereas conversion rates dropped 15%. So the biggest consideration for us has actually been CPMs recently. So we've tried to deploy a lot of strategies to improve engagement rates, which essentially lower CPMs across the account. And I think Facebook's been brilliant as well in terms of introducing new things to support advertisers. So for any listeners who have not tested DABA, essentially it stands for Dynamic Ads for Broad Audiences. That's a very effective way to drive good traffic and sales at a low cost. And although the iOS piece is significant, a bigger consideration for us is the CPMs. And just my final point would be kind of like channel diversification. So just where Facebook has got so costly, you'll slowly start to see a lot of brands moving to the likes of Snapchat. Obviously, TikTok's the most used platform on earth, so that's definitely worth kind of like looking at understanding what consumers are on there and how to engage new customers. So yeah, I realize that's a a bit of an essay and a brief question, but hopefully I've touched on like a few fundamental areas for people to look into.
And I think that's lovely. I think I'll add a little tiny bit to that also. I totally agree with you about, the owned data side of it. That's what I'm seeing too. And the first party data is extremely important. I think about RFM, this recency frequency monetization strategy. And I've had a few other partners on like Segments and a few others that really understand the cohorts of Shopify site visitors and orders. And so they understand the first, the second, the third. They know at-risk and loyal customers, and you're able to segment them and market to them based on the first party data. So I would totally agree with you. Whatever tools you're using, I'll put some links in the show notes, but there's lots of great tools to kind of slice and dice your Shopify order data to then figure out, how do I get my first sale to a second, and how do I cultivate and create campaigns around my most loyal customers, that my VIPs. And so it's very interesting. So I would totally agree with you on that. I also want to add that, those listening today, you may want to consider zero party data, which means how do I enrich my first party, which is my order data pretty much in Shopify? How do I get more information from my customers from a marketing perspective? And I know I've had Octane AI on in the past, and they have a really good quiz solution. I know they've had a lot of case studies around how do I ask the right questions to make sure that when I'm marketing to them, if let's say I'm a pet brand, I don't want to send dog food ads to them, whatever the channels are. We'll talk about the diversification in a minute, but you don't want to send dog food ads if they've kind of self-selected as being a cat person, right? So I totally agree with you. First party, zero party, I think is really important. And then you mentioned about the social commerce. I think just the whole idea of diversifying outside of the typical channels. I know Shopify has been really doubled down with Shopify Payments and Shop Pay, and being able to be in Pinterest and being in TikTok and being in Snapchat and all the networks that, and buying from within ads now. It's so interesting, some of the things that are available. And I think it's diversifying and testing. Are you seeing that on your end?
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I'm like the biggest advocate of Facebook and Instagram for advertisers, but we work quite closely with Snapchat now. And essentially their CPMs are 3 times there than Facebook. So even if your conversion rate is half through Snapchat, it's going to work out more profitable. And I think they're seeing the opportunity as well. So for all of our clients, they're offering free test budget. So, clients can come in and test the system for free. They built some augmented reality assets for one of our clients for free. So yeah, they're definitely recognizing the opportunity and pushing. Equally, we're doing a lot more with Pinterest now. And then TikTok's an interesting one. So I don't think it's necessarily the best platform for conversions yet. I should definitely be on like every brand's radar. And I'd say for about 15% of our clients, we're doing ads currently. But obviously that's going to grow quite a lot.
Just to add to that as well, we do have, we've got one client, and I won't say who it is, but we do have a client that's doing a pretty significant amount through Instagram checkout now, which I find really interesting. So I think our average client is kind of testing it in the US market, but we've got one client where Instagram have kind of incentivized them a little bit to push it. And I think they've provided some money maybe to allow for like promotions and stuff like that, but they're doing well in the millions a year via Instagram checkout, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I love that. One thing I want to touch on before I go to my next question was you were talking about the importance, I think Josh is probably more in your wheelhouse, about the importance of creative and testing creative, just because CPMs and the ROAS kind of, challenges and banner blindness and all the different things that can happen. I find that a lot of brands get on this kind of unfortunate kind of content hamster wheel a little bit. And they feel like it's a never ending process of having to come up with unique, either UGC, user generated content, or animated GIFs. And there's so many different types of creative. I just wanted to hear, your insights kind of on boots on the ground right now. Like, what's your thought on ad creative and any little tips and things you can give our listeners?
No, definitely. I mean, I think that's a very valid point. I think all of our clients, if you asked them, would suggest that they want more creative more regularly. You mentioned kind of like there's lots of different types. So UGC, kind of like video, lifestyle, campaign visuals, product rich kind of like content. The big thing for us is we work very closely with kind of like creative design team with kind of like different teams within clients' businesses. And a big focus for us is you can actually build out assets quite easily with minimal content. So I still agree that regular asset production is fundamental. We do a lot of analysis around ad fatigue, and you do quite quickly see that after 3 to 4 weeks of running the same ad, fatigue kicks in, CTR drops, CPMs increase. So you definitely want to be constantly iterating new versions of creative. And essentially the way we manage it is we would have, say, 5 assets running simultaneously. And then every 2 weeks or so, depending on the spend, we'd pause the underperformers, just say 2 versions, for example, and rotate in 2 new ones, and then just retrospectively take learnings. So we would go in with an initial hypothesis around what we're testing and so on. But what we've noticed with a lot of brands is a lot of clients have brilliant Instagram organic content. And all you need to do to build a lot of assets is simply just put those into kind of like video content with different product features, different messages about the brand. So there's actually a good case study between Facebook and Allbirds. And essentially what Allbirds were trying to do was it was just trying to understand percentage mix of messaging between the brand and the product. So they started off initially with just being completely brand messaging. So all about sustainability, all about the business goal and ambitions, and kind of like all about the broad product catalog. And then they slowly moved down to ads, which were just solely focused on individual product benefits. And their testing process was just to understand what form of messaging worked best. And a lot of the assets they used were just visual product assets adjusted into a video with just different product text overlays. So I definitely think it can be made easier than what a lot of advertisers deem it to be, but it should be a huge focus. But I think if you've got product images, you've got some lifestyle images, you definitely can build a good brief to build out a lot of video content just with a small amount of initial content. So that would be my initial response, because I'm very aware that I don't think there's any brand out there who have, constantly got access to creative that they want.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, I'll put the link in the show notes, but one area of UGC that's interesting for a lot of brands is what's going on Instagram stories, which unfortunately the creative is only available for 24 hours. And you can't be there right clicking and saving, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when people are mentioning your brand and for free, maybe not true influencers yet. And I think there's some tools out there that are scraping in real time now and almost creating a war chest of UGC Instagram story content that then can work on the rights management around that content and figure out how can I leverage that? How do I build a new relationship with, someone who's promoting my brand that's not even quote unquote officially on the books as an influencer? Have you seen that at all on your side?
No, not too much, to be honest. So we actually don't work too closely with organic content teams. So I think if we were to come across like an app like that, we would, love the content to be sent to us. We could propose what might be used as paid assets. That's actually a brilliant idea. We've not yet looked too much into that. Yeah, I can definitely see the value.
Absolutely. I'll make sure I put everything in the show notes for that one. So let's pivot a bit over to, I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a second about, other marketing agencies maybe that are serving Shopify brands. I think my thought around this is that, where there's competition, there's business. And it's very clear with over 2 million brands on Shopify and massively growing. D2C is here to stay. There appears to be an end, or at least a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to what's going on with the pandemic right now. But people are still love online shopping and the discovery part of it. I still think there's lots of opportunity. It's a very blue ocean out there. But if you do a quick Google search, or I'm sure you'll find some notable peers or, believed to be notable peers kind of that are helping Shopify brands to grow and scale. But with your awards and just like your whole mindset around, the consultancy and then the paid acquisition side, I just would like to understand a little bit about how you're, intentionally different from others in the Shopify ecosystem, even though you're serving potentially the same customers.
We obviously try and focus on a couple of key differentiators. So a big one for us, as Paul mentioned at the start, we never intended to form an agency. So initially our goal was to just be a real strategic consultancy. We would spend 2 days a week in our client's office. And a big focus for us when we have scaled was to kind of keep that seniority within our account management. So all of our day-to-day account managers are typically much more experienced general agency. So we would, really upskill them around different elements of e-commerce. They would all be able to go into Shopify, very advanced with shopping feeds. They would all be able to adjust image URLs for DPAs, all very kind of technical around the Instagram shop and kind of the ability to build product sets and everything else. We've always tried to build a bit of a niche for ourselves. So a big focus recently has been a technology push. So as we've spoke on the podcast and as kind of we're all aware, is creative's just been a massive focus for brands recently. We start to see one challenge where if you go into the Facebook interface and you've got a number of campaigns targeting different regions, you've got different campaigns targeting different audiences, and you can end up with a complex array of ads within the interface. It's quite difficult for anyone to go in and quickly understand what ads are working well. So we pretty quickly built a creative reporting dashboard, which we share with clients that the team use every day. And it gives us a real-time view of aggregated ad data. So rather than looking at kind of like the same ad in multiple instances within the interface, which is quite hard to analyze, it just gives you a single line view of each ad's performance. And then, you could filter by market, you could filter for prospecting. But that's like a really great solution where our client teams can just quickly go in and see their best ad. And, that's kind of something we identified as pretty key, which we built out. We built out a number of inventory trackers. So it sends alerts to clients when products go out of stock. We scrape competitor websites for price changes and kind of like when they go into promotion. Yeah, so we've always tried to build out quite a technical offerings. We do a lot around like GA and GTM as well. We also have a Shopify app, which I'm sure Paul would love to quickly introduce.
Yeah, we built an app that was initially designed for kind of on-site feedback. And then it was going to be on the order confirmation page where we started, and then also kind of grow into an on-site feedback form just where people can report bugs, etc. And then it gradually grew into kind of more attribution surveys, and then now trying to get more context from the customer that we can then pass into kind of CRMs and ESPs, etc. But yeah, we use that a lot with paid clients, and that's been really good. And we've got a nice little roadmap on that. We use it quite a lot for international as well, like where clients want to understand the barriers or like how customers have responded to barriers around kind of duties, maybe that they communicate with the customer through the checkout process or shipping timescales, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's been really good as well.
I didn't realize this, so I'm actually in the Shopify App Store right now having a peek at it. So I would totally agree with the benefits. This is interesting where there's a rule-based post-purchase surveys, because I always recommend people at least, corroborate your ad spend on how did you hear about us? And then maybe a follow-up question. Oh, it was podcast? Oh, which podcast? Or, and so at least it helps corroborate some of your ad spend opportunities. But then I think there's other creative ways of having exit intent surveys and stuff. It looks like you have NPS scores and bugs and attribution things and UX feedback. There's a lot of things that I see this tool can do that I had no idea. So congrats on that. And so I want to pivot a bit over to a story. I think it's so interesting to me. There's this education process and almost inspiration that comes around stories. And I've had a chance to kind of go to Vervaunt's website and have a look, and you have quite a few case studies. Obviously, Bulletproof is one of my brands, but there's so many others, and I hopefully don't put you on the spot here, but it would be great if you could maybe share maybe a few stories of some, recent Shopify brands that have worked with you. It could be strictly on the consultation side, and then they did the implementation on their end, or it could be on, the performance side of actually paid social and paid ads and things like that. So I'll kind of leave it up to you how you want to unpack some of your notable partners and, D2C brands that you've worked with.
There's a few that I talk about quite often. So Self-Portrait is a really nice one. So they're a global fashion brand. So we recently migrated them over to the Shopify about a month ago, which has been a really good project. They were pretty, intertwined with Magento before. They don't have too many kind of back office systems. It was a complex project to make it work for Shopify. So that was a really good one. David Austin Roses, which was probably about 3 years ago. I had a really small team also on Magento. We did a lot of complex work with a PIM with them. And we also did a lot of kind of quite heavy customization with Shopify via kind of private apps. We built like a kind of fake parent-child relationship to handle some complexity around their catalog. So that was a really good one. And then Totem's one that I personally really like just because it's a really good brand experience. And at the time when we were reviewing the platforms, one of the concerns from their internal team was around Shopify being able to kind of, deliver on that kind of unique brand experience. And this is pre 2.0 as well. And it's a really good site. We did that with We Make Websites. But Vervaunt's another one actually that we've launched fairly recently. That's really good.
A story we kind of like often reference back to is Pangaea. So they essentially were kind of like a relatively small client around 2.5 years ago. They're now one of our biggest brands. They're kind of like our biggest spender in the paid media space. And with those, we've basically worked very aggressively to target new customers. So we worked quite closely on customer acquisition costs and lifetime value to really use a new way of measurement. We rolled out some really cool tactics. So we would serve the equivalent of organic content to existing customers. So we would get a lot of engagement, a lot of comments. We would ask what color hoodie people used, and then we would serve that to new customers. So essentially it was a socially proofed ad with the likes and comments. We basically had like hundreds of ideas like that. We had country specific content we were pushing. We had localized shopping feeds. So I think that's a brilliant story where they went from spending, kind of like in the thousands of pounds a month to, during Black Friday months up to millions. Yeah, just a really good story where we like actively, scaled the account across multiple markets. But I also think it's quite nice to touch on some of the larger brands we work with that worked with initially as in a proof of concept stage and then have kind of like proven the value of paid media. So Muji is quite a nice example, global brand, kind of like stores, globally across the world. Initially with them, we started off with just PPC in the UK. That scaled to global paid search and paid social management. So we've really proven the value of paid media. We've done that with quite a few other brands. So Stussy, for example, we started working with earlier this year, have kind of like really proven the value of paid. We've moved into the generic space in paid search. We're pushing Google Shopping much more. With Lush, for example, we managed their first ever paid search activity. So yeah, I think a nice thing for us is also not only working with the fast growing brands, but also really introducing the value of paid to some of the more established clients we work with.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'll make sure I put all those links in the show notes just so you can go back and take a look to see, just once again, the story is great and then the growth is great, but it's nice to actually go in and actually take a look and saying, hey, what does great look like today? And I think that's what inspires a lot of people that are listening. One thing I want to just touch on a bit is about maybe the future of Vervaunt. I know that I had one question here that I always like to ask because, here we are, we're in mid 2022 right now. We're in probably in May by the time this is being released in Q2. And I'm always curious on the North Star. It's very clear that you kind of position yourself as being, deeply entrenched in D2C, both from a consultancy side and the paid acquisition side, and aligning yourself with some partners from the development side to help with UX improvements and things like that. But just would like to understand, where do you see the future of your company and how are you going to continue to offer value and assistance for Shopify brands?
Yeah, I don't think Josh and I necessarily have the answer to this. We've never really had a massive vision. I think, we've got two sides to the business. We both want to be the best. We've grown a lot recently, which is always a challenge. And I think we just want to keep strengthening. We want to work with cool, particularly on the e-com side, we almost intentionally have kept it very small so we can pick and choose the cool brands we work with, work on cool projects. I want to be working with Web3 projects. I want to do more kind of really advanced CRM stuff. I want to push more kind of multi-channel stuff. I want to definitely be continuing to work on new stuff. Yeah, and then I want to continue building out our own technology. I'm sure Josh will talk a little bit more about creative. But yeah, ultimately, I just want to continue doing cool stuff, more so than kind of growing the team or growing financially. I think that may well kind of happen in line with those two things. I think just working with cool brands has always been the thing that motivates us probably the most. Would you agree with that, Josh?
Yeah, exactly. And I think for us, it's, we just want to be involved in the best projects. I think Paul mentioned, but, it's quite exciting now. We're working much more closely with Snapchat, as I mentioned, who we had kind of wrote off a couple of years ago when performance wasn't there. But yeah, definitely a big opportunity for us to introduce new channels to clients, to diversify in some areas. So a big focus for us is, just what we spoke so much about creative, where we're actively hiring for someone to kind of own our creative offering. And I think a lot of that role will just be added value to existing clients. So just making those small tweaks to creative, what I mentioned. So just making slight adjustments to allow us to test and to iterate and, build out creatives. I think that would be a big focus for us. But yeah, we're just very much, as Paul mentioned, we're not kind of led by financials. We just want to make sure we're, building a good brand. All clients, really respect us and appreciate working with us. So that's kind of our overall goal.
Beautiful. And Josh, I had a quick peek to see that tool that does UGC scraping from Instagram stories, and it was episode 226. I'll put it in the show notes. The company is called archive.com, and Paul Benny-Jerry is the co-founder and CEO of that company. So archive.com, have a peek at that. Really neat solution that just runs full time. Once again, it just gives you a war chest of UGC content based on hashtags and other different mentions and things. Some known people and some unknown people. And then the rights management around that content and how you can repurpose it into social ads and things like that. I know it's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, but it's an interesting way to potentially expand your creative mix through UGC. So
that sounds brilliant, to be honest. As I mentioned, I think all of our clients would appreciate the ability to source more content. This is just going to be providing, UGC creative, which we can just flick through and reach out to anyone relevant.
Josh, we do work of a few other companies with some of our clients that I think probably I work with more than you, but some of our clients are doing similar things with UGC, but more of like QRelate and some of those companies. And then they're just trying, I think this is probably more designed to do it at scale and download the assets and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it gives you a war chest. And I think part of their deal is that I know this is more about you guys, but it's an interesting topic about, just creative and that hamster wheel we talked about. And just another way of, you're right, they call it a war chest of potential UGC content. And some can go on PDP pages, some could go into social ads. There's lots of different ways. And then, even worst case scenario, or better case, I guess, is learning who's actually loving your brand. And because you'd be really surprised. It's not just the influencers that are being paid with product or some kind of campaigns. They just generally love the product and they just want to get their 15 minutes of fame. They mention brands on purpose, but then a lot of times they're missed. In Instagram stories, it gives you a much more better real estate in the app itself than just having to go through the regular Instagram feed, right? So that'll be in the show notes for sure. Before we kind of lead off for the rest of this episode, I just would like to know, where should we send people? So we understand what you do. Is there any place particular that they should go? I guess Vervaunt.com would be number one. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I think that's probably it. I send a newsletter that I spend a lot of time doing, which can be found on Vervaunt.com. Yeah, I've got my personal blog, Paul M. Rogers, but I don't update that anywhere near as much as I should do. Yeah, Vervaunt.com is definitely the best place.
All right, very cool. And I'll make sure I put links to all that. Same to your app for surveys. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. So I just want to thank you both for coming on the show today. It's always fun and unique to have two guests on together, but it's nice that you've kind of put yourself in your own kind of specialty areas and stuff. And I just really appreciate that. And once again, congrats on your win. Congrats on being aligned, quite tightly now with Shopify. And I really appreciate that. I know you're mostly dealing just based on geography, more in the European markets, but I just see sounds like there's some great opportunity for North American brands for Vervaunt too, even outside of time zones and things. So I think maybe you can unpack that. Just let me know if that's something where you see yourself expanding on that.
It's interesting you say that. We've got our colleague, so our head of performance marketing is in the US for the next 3 months, assessing the market. Yeah, so she's in New York, meeting lots of people, working. We do have a lot of clients in particularly East Coast US, and then I do consultancy for quite a lot of brands in the West Coast as well. But yeah, it's definitely on the roadmap, just because, Josh and I both love the US. There's a lot of great brands over there. And yeah, we've got existing clients. So yeah, it's something we're actually working on very recently. So Bethan moved over last week, or temporarily moved over.
That's lovely, because I'm part of the Revenue West organization. So anything kind of west of the Mississippi, I guess. And I have lots of brands in California. So this is great. This is great that you're kind of potentially offering more services and time zone friendly kind of opportunities for client meetings and things like that. So that's awesome. Well, both, I just thank you guys for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. One thing that I know this, but Shopify has a mission, and it really is to make commerce better for everyone. And it's, very clear based on this kind of conversation today. You guys really are in tight alignment with wanting to help Shopify brands in a lot of areas, efficiencies and revenue and lifetime value, and all through either consultancy or through, acquisition strategies and performance marketing. I just really appreciate that. And thanks for sharing your knowledge and your vision, and just, I guess, at the end of the day, just giving back to the Shopify ecosystem.
Yeah, great. No, we've really, I've certainly really enjoyed it. I'm sure Josh has too.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Steve. And really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, and have yourself a great day. Today's episode was brought to you by Conversion Fanatics. If you're doing 7 or 8 figures or more on your Shopify store and you're not doing conversion optimization, you're definitely leaving cash on the table. Now, the team at Conversion Fanatics, as I mentioned, runs thousands of site experiments every year for clients like Clorox, Burt's Bees, NBC Sports, and so many more. They optimize your site so you can get a lot more customers, scale up your traffic faster, and see a lot more profit. And they make it easy, and they handle everything. So go to conversionfanatics.com for a free site proposal and tell them eCommerce Fastlane sent you, because as I said, traffic without conversions is sad. All right, go check them out, conversionfanatics.com. Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you, a loyal listener of eCommerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, launch, grow, and scale with Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.